My son sold my house while I was in the hospital. He said, "You don't have long left anyway." A month later, the notary read him a letter I had written 20 years ago. He lost everything. I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I built my house in 1984, the year my son Derek was born. Every beam, every nail, every coat of paint carried the sweat of my hands and the hope of a father who wanted to give his family something permanent. My wife Eleanor and I raised Derek in those rooms, watched him take his first steps in the kitchen, celebrated his graduation in the backyard, and eventually said goodbye to Eleanor in the bedroom upstairs when cancer took her 5 years ago. The house sat on 3 acres in rural Pennsylvania, surrounded by maple trees that Eleanor had planted when Derek started kindergarten. By the time I turned 72, those trees were taller than the roof, and their shade kept the summers bearable. I had retired from my career as a land surveyor 8 years earlier, and my days consisted of tending to the garden, reading engineering journals, and occasionally helping neighbors with property disputes. Life was quiet, predictable, and exactly what I wanted after 4 decades of measuring other people's land. Derek visited once a month, sometimes less. He lived 40 minutes away in a subdivision with his wife Megan and their 2 teenagers. Our conversations had grown shorter over the years, reduced to updates about weather and sports scores. I noticed he always glanced around the house during visits, his eyes lingering on the original hardwood floors, the stone fireplace, the view of the valley from the back porch. I told myself he was simply appreciating his childhood home. Parents want to believe the best about their children. The first warning came in March, 3 months before everything collapsed. Derek called on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual because he typically only called on Sundays. His voice carried an unfamiliar warmth. "Dad, Megan and I were talking, and we think you shouldn't be alone out there. What if something happens? You're not getting any younger." I reminded him that I was perfectly capable of living independently. My doctor had given me a clean bill of health at my last checkup. I still drove, still mowed my own lawn, still climbed the stairs without difficulty. "We just worry about you." Derek said, "Have you thought about what would happen to the house if you got sick? These things need to be planned." The question struck me as oddly specific. I told him I had made arrangements years ago that everything was taken care of. He pressed for details, but I deflected. Something about his tone made me cautious, though I could not articulate why at the time. 2 weeks later, he visited with a folder of documents, power of attorney forms. He explained that it was just a precaution, something to make things easier if I ever became incapacitated. Megan sat in the car during the entire conversation, watching through the windshield. "Everyone does this, Dad. It's responsible planning." I told him I would think about it. He left the folder on the kitchen table, and I noticed his jaw tighten as he walked out. That night, I put the unsigned papers in a drawer and tried to forget about them. But the interaction stayed with me like a splinter under the skin. Then came May, and the stroke that changed everything. It happened on a Thursday morning while I was watering the tomato plants. One moment I was adjusting the hose, the next I was on the ground, unable to move my left side, unable to call for help. My neighbor found me 2 hours later and called an ambulance. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital and another 4 in a rehabilitation facility, relearning how to walk, how to grip objects, how to speak without slurring. Derek visited twice during that entire period. The first time, he stood at the foot of my bed and stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not concern or sympathy, it was calculation. "The doctors say you might not fully recover," he said. "You need to be realistic about your situation." I tried to respond, but my words came out garbled. He nodded as if I had confirmed something, then left after 15 minutes. His second visit came near the end of my rehabilitation stay. He brought papers again. This time, he did not ask me to sign them. He simply informed me that he had obtained power of attorney through the court, citing my incapacity. He had documentation from a doctor I had never met, testimony from Megan about my supposed cognitive decline. "It's for your own good." he said. "You can't take care of yourself anymore. You can't take care of the house." I stared at him. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle. The teenager I had helped with calculus homework. The man I had loaned money to 3 times without ever being repaid. And I saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, who he had become. "The house is being sold," Derek continued. "I found a buyer. You'll move to assisted living. It's already arranged." The words hit me like a second stroke. My house, Eleanor's trees, 40 years of memories. Gone because my son saw an opportunity. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to something between pity and contempt. "You need to accept this, Dad. You don't have long left anyway." He walked out, and I lay in that hospital bed, paralyzed not by the stroke but by the betrayal of my own blood. The rehabilitation facility discharged me on a Tuesday morning. Derek had arranged for a transport van to take me directly to Sunrise Senior Living, a facility 20 miles from my home. From my former home. I had to remind myself. I had no keys, no access to my belongings, no say in any of it. The power of attorney gave Derek complete control over my assets and my life. My room at Sunrise was 12 feet by 14 feet. A single window overlooked the parking lot. The walls were beige, the furniture was institutional, and the smell was a mixture of disinfectant and something I did not want to identify. This was where my son expected me to die. For the first 3 days, I did nothing. I sat in the chair by the window and watched cars come and go. Visitors arrived with flowers, residents shuffled to the dining hall, staff members changed shifts. Life continued around me while I tried to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. My house had been sold. The closing had occurred while I was still in rehabilitation. Derek had pocketed the proceeds, over $400,000 based on recent sales in the area. I owned nothing. I controlled nothing. My son had erased 40 years of my life in a matter of weeks. But grief has a limit. On the 4th day, something shifted inside me. I thought about Eleanor, about the strength she had shown during her illness, about the way she had refused to let cancer define her final months. I thought about my own career, the decades I had spent solving problems that others considered impossible. I was an engineer. I analyzed systems, identified weaknesses, and found solutions. This situation, as devastating as it was simply another problem to solve. The fear did not disappear. It sat in my chest like a cold stone, but alongside the fear came something else: determination. I needed information. I needed to understand exactly what Derek had done and whether there were any legal vulnerabilities in his actions. And I needed to do this without alerting him to my intentions. As far as he knew, I was a broken old man waiting to die. That assumption was my only advantage. I started by befriending the staff. Not manipulation, genuine connection. I learned their names, asked about their families, listened to their frustrations. A certified nursing assistant named Patricia had worked at Sunrise for 11 years and knew every administrative process. A maintenance worker named George had a brother who was a paralegal. These relationships would prove essential. Patricia helped me access a computer in the activity room. My hands still trembled from the stroke, and typing was slow, but I managed to search for information about power of attorney laws in Pennsylvania. What I discovered made my pulse quicken. A power of attorney could be challenged if it was obtained through fraud, undue influence, or if the principal was not actually incapacitated at the time. More importantly, any transactions made under a fraudulent power of attorney could potentially be reversed. I thought about the doctor who had certified my incapacity, a physician I had never met, never consulted, never authorized to access my medical records. I thought about the court proceedings that had granted Derek authority over my affairs, proceedings I had never been notified about. The more I researched, the more irregularities I found. But legal challenges required evidence and resources. I was a resident of a senior facility with no income, no assets, and no access to my own documents. How could I possibly fight my son in court? And then I remembered. 20 years ago, after a colleague lost everything to a dishonest business partner, I had consulted with an estate planning attorney named Richard Castellano. We had spent 3 months constructing a protective framework for my assets. The centerpiece was a living trust, irrevocable, with specific provisions that would activate under certain conditions. I had named a trustee, established criteria for distributions, and included clauses designed to prevent exactly the kind of exploitation I was now experiencing. I had told Derek that I had made arrangements. I had never told him what those arrangements were. The trust documents were stored in a safe deposit box at First National Bank in downtown Lancaster. The box was registered in the trust's name, not mine, which meant Derek's power of attorney did not give him access. The successor trustee was Richard Castellano's firm, which meant the trust remained active and enforceable regardless of my personal circumstances. Derek had sold a house that did not belong to me. It belonged to the trust. I sat in the activity room, staring at the computer screen, and felt something I had not felt since before the stroke. Hope. Not optimism, not confidence, but the first faint possibility that justice might still be achievable. My plan began to take shape. First, I needed to contact Richard Castellano's firm and confirm the trust was still valid. Second, I needed to gather evidence of Derek's fraud, the false medical certification, the improper court proceedings, the sale of trust property. Third, I needed to find legal representation willing to take my case. Each step carried risks. If Derek discovered what I was doing, he could move to have me declared incompetent, could restrict my communications, could transfer me to a facility where I would have no autonomy. I had to move carefully, quietly, and quickly. The fear was still there, that cold stone in my chest. But now it shared space with something stronger. My son had underestimated me. He had looked at an old man in a hospital bed and seen weakness. He was wrong. I had built my house with my own hands. I would not let him steal it without a fight. I made my first phone call on a Monday morning using the facility's communal phone in a corner of the activity room. The number for Castellano and Associates was still listed, though Richard himself had retired 4 years ago. His daughter, Veronica Castellano, had taken over the practice. "Mr. Harrison," she said after I explained who I was. "I remember your file. My father spoke highly of you. He said you were one of the few clients who actually understood what a trust was supposed to do. I told her what had happened. The stroke, the power of attorney, the sale of my house." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "The house was titled to the Harrison Family Trust," she said. "Your son had no authority to sell it. The power of attorney is irrelevant because the trust is a separate legal entity. He sold property he didn't own." Hearing those words from an attorney transformed abstract hope into concrete possibility. But Veronica's next statement tempered my relief. "Unwinding a fraudulent sale is complicated. We need to establish that the buyer knew or should have known about the trust. We need to prove your son committed fraud, and we need to do it before he spends all the money. Do you know who bought the house?" I did not. I did not even know when the closing had occurred. All I knew was what Derek had told me, and Derek was not a reliable source. "I can access the trust documents from our archives," Veronica said, "but I'll need you to come to the office to verify your identity and sign some authorizations. Can you get here?" That was the first obstacle. I was a resident of Sunrise Senior Living. I did not have a car, did not have money for a taxi, and could not ask Derek for transportation without revealing my intentions. Leaving the facility required signing out, and any unexplained absences might raise questions. This is where George, the maintenance worker, became essential. His brother Marcus worked as a paralegal at a personal injury firm, and Marcus owed George a favor. 2 days later, Marcus arrived at Sunrise in his own car and signed me out as a visitor for a dental appointment. We drove to Lancaster, to the offices of Castellano and Associates, where Veronica was waiting with a folder that contained the original trust documents from 2005. I read through the papers with hands that were steadier than they had been in weeks. The trust was comprehensive, exactly as I remembered. It held the title to the house and property. It designated Eleanor and then Derek as initial beneficiaries. But there were clauses, specific clauses I had insisted on 20 years ago after seeing what happened to my colleague. If any beneficiary attempted to sell, transfer, or encumber trust property without proper trustee approval, that beneficiary would be automatically removed and disinherited. If any beneficiary exercised undue influence over the truster, same result. The trust included provisions for an independent medical evaluation if incapacity was claimed, and the evaluation had to be conducted by a physician selected by the trustee, not by family members. Derek had violated every single provision. "This is strong," Veronica said. "But we still need evidence of what he actually did. Court records, the sale documents, communications. And we need to act fast. Once he realizes you're fighting back, he'll try to cover his tracks. Over the next week, Veronica filed requests for court records and property transfer documents. What came back was damning. The power of attorney had been granted by a judge based on a petition that included a medical affidavit from a Dr. Howard Phelps. I had never heard of Dr. Howard Phelps. According to his affidavit, he had examined me and determined I was mentally incapacitated and unable to manage my affairs. The examination had supposedly occurred on May 15th. On May 15th, I had been in the intensive care unit, intubated and sedated. No examination had occurred. The affidavit was a fabrication. Veronica obtained the property sale records next. The house had sold for $380,000, approximately $50,000 below market value. The buyer was an LLC called Clearview Properties. A quick search revealed that Clearview was connected to a real estate investor named Paul Norton, who specialized in buying properties from distressed sellers. The closing had occurred on June 3rd, just 6 weeks after my stroke. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Patricia, the nursing assistant at Sunrise, mentioned that she had worked briefly at the hospital during my stay. She remembered Derek's visits because he had argued with the nursing staff about accessing my medical records. She also remembered something else. Derek had brought a man to my room late one evening, someone who was not a hospital physician, someone who had looked at me for less than 5 minutes before leaving. Dr. Howard Phelps. I now had evidence of a forged medical affidavit, a fraudulent power of attorney, and an illegal sale of trust property. I had a paper trail that led directly to my son, but I also knew that Derek was not stupid. He would notice eventually that documents were being requested, that inquiries were being made. He would figure out that I was not the passive victim he assumed. Veronica filed the first legal motion on a Thursday afternoon, a petition to void the power of attorney and freeze any remaining sale proceeds. The moment that motion hit the court system, my quiet investigation would become public. The point of no return had arrived. Derek called me on Saturday morning, 2 days after Veronica filed the petition. His voice was controlled, but I heard the tension beneath the surface. "Dad, I got a call from a lawyer. She says you're trying to challenge the power of attorney. She says you're claiming the house sale was illegal." I was sitting in my room at sunrise, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart beating faster than it had in months. I had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed what I would say, but hearing Derek's voice made my throat tighten. "The house belonged to the trust, Derek. You sold property you didn't own." Silence on the other end. Then a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "The trust. You never told me about any trust. I told you I had made arrangements. You were supposed to leave everything to me. I'm your son. That house was my inheritance." The entitlement in his voice was breathtaking. He had stolen from me, lied to me, forged medical documents to have me declared incompetent, and his primary complaint was that I had not made it easier for him. "The petition has been filed," I said. "The court will decide what happens next." "You're making a mistake, Dad. You're embarrassing yourself. Everyone will see a confused old man who doesn't understand what's happening. Is that what you want? To spend your last years in courtrooms?" There it was again. The assumption that I was dying, that I was feeble, that I should simply accept whatever he decided to do with my life and my property. I had heard this attitude from him for years, I realized, in small comments and dismissive gestures. I had just refused to see it. "My attorney will be in touch," I said, and hung up. That evening, Derek and Megan arrived at sunrise unannounced. I was in the common room when they came through the entrance. Megan walked slightly ahead, her face set in an expression of professional sympathy. Derek followed, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Walter," Megan said, using my first name, which she had never done before. "We're so worried about you. This lawyer, she's taking advantage of a vulnerable person. She's filling your head with confusion." "I'm not confused. You had a stroke, Walter. You're not thinking clearly. Derek has only ever wanted what's best for you." Behind her, Derek stood with his arms crossed, watching me. The calculation I had seen in his eyes at the hospital was there again, but now it was mixed with something else. Anger. Fear. "We can make this all go away," Megan continued. "No lawyers, no courts. Derek will take care of everything like he always has. You just need to sign a few documents, and we can move forward as a family." She reached into her purse and produced a folder. Inside were papers that looked like legal documents, though I could not read them from where I sat. The implication was clear. They wanted me to withdraw the petition, to dismiss my attorney, to restore Derek's control over my life. "No," I said. Megan's expression flickered. Derek stepped forward, his voice dropping. "You don't understand what you're doing. If this goes to court, it won't just be the house. Everything will come out. You'll destroy this family. You destroyed this family, Derek. You forged a medical affidavit. You sold my house while I was in the hospital. You put me in this facility and told me I didn't have long left anyway. Those were your words, your actions, not mine." The color drained from his face. I had never spoken to him like this, not once in 45 years. I had always been patient, understanding, willing to give him another chance. But patience has limits. "We're done here," I said. "Leave." Megan started to respond, but Derek grabbed her arm and pulled her towards the door. He stopped at the threshold and turned back. "You'll regret this," he said. "I promise you that." They left. I sat in the common room with my pulse pounding and my hands trembling. The fear was real. Derek was cornered, and cornered people are dangerous. I did not know what he would do next, but I also felt something unexpected. Relief. The confrontation was over. The threats were in the open. There was nothing left to hide, nothing left to pretend. I asked Patricia to help me back to my room. I told her I needed rest, and for the next 3 days I did nothing but recover. I read books from the facility library. I sat in the garden and watched birds gather at the feeders. I let my body and mind settle. The next phase of the battle would require all the strength I had. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for the first week of August, 5 weeks after Veronica filed the petition. In the meantime, Derek tried a different approach. He sent his daughter, my granddaughter Emily, to visit me. Emily was 19, a sophomore at Penn State, and the only member of Derek's immediate family who had ever shown me genuine affection. When she was young, she used to spend summers at my house, helping Eleanor in the garden, asking me questions about surveying and map-making. She had her grandmother's eyes, and I hoped her grandmother's heart. She arrived at sunrise on a Thursday afternoon, alone. I was sitting on the patio when she came through the back door. Her face was anxious, uncertain. "Grandpa," she said, "Dad asked me to come." I nodded. "I figured as much. Sit down, Emily." She sat in the chair across from me, her hands clasped in her lap. I could see the conflict in her. She loved her father, but she was also a thoughtful young woman who understood right and wrong. "He says you're suing him. He says you want to take everything away. I want to recover what he took from me. There's a difference. He says you're confused, that the stroke affected your judgment. Do I seem confused to you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, you seem like you always did." I told her the truth. All of it. The forged affidavit, the power of attorney obtained while I was incapacitated, the sale of the house without my knowledge or consent. I told her about the trust, about the provisions I had put in place 20 years ago, about the legal violations her father had committed. I did not raise my voice, did not express anger. I simply laid out the facts. Emily listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know," she said finally. "He told me you were losing your memory. He said selling the house was the kindest thing, that you would be happier in a place with professional care. He said the money would pay for your treatment. Where is that money, Emily? Has any of it gone to my care?" She could not answer. We both knew the truth. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I said. "You're his daughter, and I'm not going to put that burden on you. But I want you to know the facts. When this is over, I don't want you to wonder what really happened." She left an hour later. I did not know if she would come back, did not know if our relationship could survive the destruction of her family. But I had told her the truth. That mattered. The next week, I received unexpected support. George, the maintenance worker, introduced me to a group of residents who had experienced similar situations: children who had exploited elderly parents through power of attorney abuse, trustees who had embezzled from family trusts. One woman had lost her life savings to a son who forged checks from her account. Another had been moved to a substandard facility while his daughter sold his house and spent the proceeds. They called themselves the Sunrise Survivors, a darkly humorous name that captured both their circumstances and their resilience. They met every Wednesday evening in the activity room, sharing stories and information. Most were not pursuing legal action, either because they lacked resources or because they could not bear to prosecute their own children. But they understood what I was going through. They offered advice, contacts, moral support. I was not alone. That realization changed something fundamental. For months, I had felt isolated, powerless, an old man fighting an impossible battle. But here were others who had faced the same predators, the same betrayals, the same failures of trust. Their strength became my strength. Their survival proved that survival was possible. George also provided practical help. He connected me with a reporter at the Lancaster Gazette who was investigating elder abuse cases in the county. The reporter, a woman named Shannon Webb, had written extensively about guardianship fraud and financial exploitation of seniors. She was interested in my story, particularly the forged medical affidavit and the improper court proceedings. "This is exactly the kind of case that needs public attention," Shannon said during our phone conversation. "The systems that are supposed to protect vulnerable adults are being manipulated by the people they trust most. Your story could help change that." I was cautious. Legal strategy and media exposure did not always align. Veronica would need to approve any public statements. But the possibility of broader impact, of my case helping other victims, gave the battle a significance beyond my personal losses. Derek and Megan stayed quiet during this period. No more visits, no more phone calls, no more pressure. I knew they were preparing for the hearing, consulting with their own attorneys, developing their defense. But the silence was unnerving. They were watching, waiting, planning, the calm before the escalation. 10 days before the hearing, Derek and Megan came to Sunrise again. This time, they brought a witness. Megan's brother, a man named Philip, who worked in finance and who had never, to my knowledge, shown any interest in me or my affairs. The presence of a third party immediately raised my guard. We met in the facility's small conference room. Derek sat across from me with Megan on his left and Philip on his right. It was a formation designed to intimidate, 3 against 1, family authority against a solitary old man. "Dad," Derek began, and his tone was softer than it had been during our last encounter. "We need to talk, really talk. No lawyers, no courts, just family." I waited. "I know things got out of hand. I made some decisions without consulting you, and that was wrong. I should have explained what I was doing and why. But I was scared, Dad. The doctors said your prognosis was uncertain. I thought I was losing you. I thought I needed to protect the family's assets before it was too late. It was a carefully constructed speech, hitting all the emotional notes. Fear, love, family. But the words were hollow. Derek had not been scared. He had been opportunistic. He had not been protecting assets. He had been seizing them. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Megan leaned forward. Reconciliation. We drop the lawyers, you drop the petition, and we work this out together. The house sale is done, we can't undo that, but the proceeds can be shared fairly. You'll have money for your care. We'll have money for the kids' education. Everyone benefits. Isn't that better than years of litigation? The house— It was a mistake, Derek said. I didn't know about the trust. You never told me. I told you I had made arrangements. You didn't ask what they were because you didn't care. You just wanted control. His jaw tightened. The mask was slipping. Philip spoke for the first time. Mr. Harrison, I work with trusts and estates. I've reviewed your situation objectively. The trust provisions you're relying on are ambiguous. A court might interpret them differently than your attorney expects. And even if you win, the costs will be enormous. Legal fees, expert witnesses, appeals. You could spend everything you recover just fighting the case. It was a threat dressed as advice. They were trying to convince me that victory was impossible, that the smart move was to surrender on their terms. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I have confidence in my attorney. Derek's composure finally broke. You're choosing a lawyer over your own son. You're choosing strangers over your family. What kind of father does that? What kind of son forges medical documents to have his father declared incompetent? What kind of son sells his father's home while he's lying in a hospital bed? What kind of son tells his father he doesn't have long left anyway? The room went silent. Megan's face was pale. Philip suddenly found the conference table very interesting. Derek stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. You want a war? Fine. But don't pretend you didn't start this. Don't pretend you're the victim here. You've been controlling everything from the beginning, the trust, the secrets, the conditions. You never trusted me. You never thought I was good enough. I loved you, I said quietly. I gave you everything I could. The only thing I didn't give you was the power to destroy me. He stormed out. Megan followed, pausing at the door to look back at me with something between contempt and confusion. Philip left without a word. I sat alone in the conference room, my heart racing, my hands cold. The fear was back, sharper than before. Derek's rage was real. He would not back down now. Whatever happened at the hearing, whatever the court decided, my son would never forgive me for fighting back. But forgiveness was not what I was seeking. Justice was. I returned to my room and spent the evening reviewing documents with Veronica on the phone. The hearing was in 10 days. We had evidence, precedent, and the law on our side. But Derek's desperation made him unpredictable. We had to be ready for anything. Fear is not the opposite of courage, I reminded myself. Fear is the fuel for courage. I would need every drop. The hearing took place on August 7th at the Lancaster County Courthouse. Veronica picked me up from sunrise at 8 in the morning. I wore a suit I had asked George to retrieve from a storage unit, the same suit I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. It still fit, and wearing it felt like armor. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights that cast everything in a flat, institutional glow. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Waverley, and her expression gave nothing away. Derek sat at the opposite table with his attorney, a man named Frost who had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Megan was in the gallery, along with Philip and a few others I did not recognize. Emily was not there. I did not know what to make of that. Veronica presented our case first. She was methodical, precise, each fact building on the last like bricks in a wall. The trust documents from 2005 showing clear title in the Harrison Family Trust. The power of attorney petition showing Derek's claim that I was mentally incapacitated. The medical affidavit from Dr. Howard Phelps showing a fabricated examination date. The property transfer records showing a sale conducted without trustee authorization. She called witnesses. A neurologist who had actually treated me during my hospitalization, testifying that no examination by Dr. Phelps could have occurred on May 15th because I was sedated and unresponsive. A representative from First National Bank, confirming that the safe deposit box containing the trust documents had never been accessed by Derek. A staff member from the court clerk's office, explaining that I had never been notified of the power of attorney proceedings, a violation of my due process rights. When Veronica finished, the wall was complete. Derek had sold property he did not own, using authority he had obtained through fraud. The facts were not in dispute. Only the consequences remained. Frost mounted his defense, but it was shaky from the start. He argued that Derek had acted in good faith, believing he was protecting his father's interests. He argued that the trust provisions were vague and that Derek had reasonably interpreted the property as part of my personal estate. He argued that any procedural errors were the fault of the court system, not his client. Judge Waverley interrupted him. "Counsel, your client submitted a medical affidavit from a physician who claims to have examined Mr. Harrison on a date when Mr. Harrison was in the ICU. Are you suggesting that's a procedural error?" Frost hesitated. "The affidavit may have contained inaccuracies. Dr. Phelps may have relied on second-hand information. That doesn't mean my client knew the document was false. Your client submitted the affidavit to this court. He's responsible for its contents." Derek was called to testify. Frost walked him through a prepared narrative: the devoted son, the aging father, the difficult decisions. But under Veronica's cross-examination, the story fell apart. "Mr. Harrison, when you filed for power of attorney, did you inform your father?" "He was incapacitated. He couldn't understand." "But you told him about the sale of the house while he was in rehabilitation. He clearly understood that. So why didn't you tell him about the power of attorney proceedings earlier?" No answer. "Mr. Harrison, did you instruct Dr. Phelps to prepare a medical affidavit?" "I asked him to evaluate my father's condition." "Did you tell Dr. Phelps when to say the examination occurred?" Silence. Derek's attorney objected, but Judge Waverley overruled. "Mr. Harrison, did you know your father's house was titled to a trust?" "He never told me." "Did you search property records before selling the house?" "I assumed it was in his name." "So you sold a property without verifying ownership? You obtained power of attorney without notifying your father. You submitted a medical affidavit with false information. And your defense is that you assumed everything would be fine." Derek's face was flushed. He looked at his attorney, at Megan, at the judge. He was losing control, and he knew it. "I was trying to help my father," he said, his voice rising. "Everything I did was for him. He's the one who kept secrets. He's the one who didn't trust me. He set this trap 20 years ago because he always expected me to fail." Judge Waverley let the silence hang. "Mr. Harrison," she said finally, "this court does not evaluate parental affection. This court evaluates evidence and law, and the evidence shows that you committed fraud." The ruling came 2 weeks later. Judge Waverley's decision was comprehensive and unequivocal. The power of attorney was void from inception, obtained through fraud and procedural violations. The sale of the property was void because the seller had no legal authority to transfer trust assets. The buyer, Clearview Properties, was ordered to return the property to the Harrison Family Trust. Their recourse was against Derek for breach of warranty of title. Derek was removed as a beneficiary of the trust, per the provisions I had established 20 years ago. Any attempt by a beneficiary to sell, transfer, or encumber trust property without proper authorization resulted in automatic disinheritance. The clause had worked exactly as intended. The court also referred the matter to the district attorney for investigation of criminal fraud. The forged medical affidavit, the false testimony, the improper sale, these were not just civil violations. They were crimes. Veronica called me with the news, and I sat in my room at sunrise trying to absorb the magnitude of what had happened. My house would return to the trust. Derek would inherit nothing. He faced potential criminal prosecution. The battle was won, but victory felt different than I expected. There was satisfaction, yes, and relief that the legal nightmare was ending. But there was also grief. I had lost my son. Not to death, not to distance, but to his own choices. He had looked at me and seen an obstacle, a source of wealth to be extracted. That was the truth of our relationship, stripped of sentiment and pretense. The aftermath unfolded over the following months. Clearview Properties returned the house, though not willingly. Paul Norton, the investor behind the LLC, filed a lawsuit against Derek for the purchase price plus damages. Derek had already spent much of the money on debts, on Megan's spending, on a boat that he had apparently purchased 2 weeks after the sale closed. He had no way to repay Norton. The lawsuit would likely result in garnishment of his wages for years, possibly decades. The district attorney charged Derek with fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. His attorney negotiated a plea deal to avoid trial. 3 years of probation, mandatory community service at a senior center, and full restitution to me for legal costs and damages. The probation terms included a prohibition on any contact with me without my written consent. I did not grant that consent. Megan filed for divorce 6 weeks after the criminal charges were announced. Whatever affection she had for Derek apparently did not extend to sharing his legal and financial catastrophe. She took the children, the house in the subdivision, and what remained of their savings. Derek moved into an apartment and began the long process of rebuilding a life defined by failure. I returned to my house in October, almost 6 months after the stroke that started everything. George and Patricia helped me move out of Sunrise. Members of the survivors group came to the house for a celebration, and we sat on the back porch under Eleanor's maple trees and toasted to justice, to resilience, to the stubborn refusal to be destroyed. Shannon Webb published her article about my case in the Lancaster Gazette, and the story was picked up by regional outlets and national elder abuse organizations. I received letters from people across the country who had experienced similar betrayals, who wanted to know how I had fought back, who thanked me for making their struggles visible. The house needed work after months of neglect, but I welcomed the tasks, repairing, restoring, rebuilding. This was what I knew how to do. This was who I was. Derek had called me weak, confused, finished. He had told me I didn't have long left. He was wrong about everything. 2 years have passed since the court ruling. My health has stabilized. The stroke left some permanent effects, a slight weakness on my left side, occasional difficulty finding words, but I have learned to adapt. I walk 2 miles every morning, weather permitting. I tend to Eleanor's garden. I read, I cook. I live the quiet life I had before everything collapsed. The house is mine again, fully and completely. I updated the trust provisions with Veronica, adding additional protections and naming Emily as a contingent beneficiary. If she wants a relationship with me, the door is open. If not, I will understand. Emily called me last spring, a year after the hearing. She had graduated from Penn State and was starting a job in Philadelphia. She apologized for not testifying, for not attending the hearing, for not being braver. I didn't know what to believe. She said, "Dad was telling me one thing, you were telling me another. I didn't want to take sides. You were 19 years old. It wasn't your responsibility to take sides, but I should have. I should have trusted what I saw, not what I was told. You never lied to me, Grandpa, not once. We talk every few weeks now. She visited last Thanksgiving and helped me make Eleanor's sweet potato casserole from the handwritten recipe in the kitchen drawer. We did not discuss Derek. Derek's life, from what I have heard through second-hand sources, has not improved. The divorce cost him everything. The criminal probation restricts his employment options. The civil judgment from Paul Norton takes a percentage of every paycheck. He lives alone in a small apartment and works a job that pays far less than his previous career. He is 47 years old and has nothing to show for it except the consequences of his own actions. Do I feel sorry for him? Sometimes, late at night, I remember the boy he used to be. I remember teaching him to fish at the lake behind my parents' house. I remember his pride when he made the high school baseball team. I remember thinking that he would grow into a good man, a man I could trust, a man who would carry our family forward with integrity. That boy disappeared somewhere along the way, replaced by someone I do not recognize. I do not know when it happened or why. Maybe I made mistakes as a father. Maybe I was too lenient, too trusting, too willing to see the best in him, despite evidence to the contrary. Or maybe some people simply choose their path, and no amount of love can redirect them. Either way, the choice was his. The consequences are his. Megan remarried within a year of the divorce to a businessman she met through Philip. Derek's children live with her now and have taken their stepfather's last name. The family Derek sacrificed everything to enrich has moved on without him. The Sunrise survivors still meet every Wednesday evening. I attend when I can, driving myself to the facility that was supposed to be my final residence. I share my story with new members, answer their questions, offer whatever guidance might help. Some of them pursue legal action. Some do not. But all of them know they are not alone, that survival is possible, that the people who prey on the vulnerable do not always win. Shannon Webb won an award for her reporting on elder abuse, and my case was featured in a documentary that aired on public television. I did not seek publicity, but I came to understand its value. Every story that reaches the public makes the problem harder to ignore. Every victim who speaks out makes the next victim less isolated. I am 74 years old. I do not know how many years I have left, but I know how I want to spend them. In my house, surrounded by Eleanor's trees, living the life I built with my own hands. My son tried to take that from me. He failed. That is justice. I often think about the letter I wrote 20 years ago, the one explaining the trust provisions to whoever needed to understand them after I was gone. Richard Castellano kept a copy. I kept a copy. And when the time came, that letter proved Derek's intentions beyond any doubt. But here's the question I want to leave with you. What would you have done if your child betrayed you like this? Would you fight back? Would you risk the relationship, the family, the public exposure? Or would you accept the loss and try to preserve whatever peace remained? I do not think there is a right answer. Every situation is different. Every family has its own history, its own wounds, its own capacity for forgiveness. I made my choice, and I live with it. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment. Tell me what you think, what you would have done, how you protect yourself and your loved ones from this kind of exploitation. And if you want to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more experiences to share, more lessons to learn, more reminders that the vulnerable are not always powerless. Thank you for listening.